I never imagined that betrayal could crawl so close to home, so silently, until the day I discovered that my own sister-in-law, someone I had once welcomed into my heart like a sister, had secretly drained every cent of my hard-earned savings from our joint bank account. It's hard to even find the right place to begin because the story isn't only about money. It's about trust, the wounds of family, the kind of pain that gnaws at you in the quietest hours of the night, and the haunting truth that sometimes the greatest thief is the person sitting across the dinner table, smiling as if nothing had been stolen. I'm 42 years old, and my name is Marissa. For as long as I can remember, I worked tirelessly to build a modest but stable life. I wasn't born into privilege. I grew up in a small town where every dollar counted, and my parents often worried about bills more than birthdays. From the moment I could hold a job, I learned the weight of responsibility. By the time I was 25, I had already put aside small savings, not because I was greedy or obsessed with wealth, but because I feared scarcity, the kind of emptiness I had watched my parents battle. When I married Ethan, my high school sweetheart, I thought life was finally balancing out. He wasn't rich, but he was kind, grounded, and hardworking. We built our life together slowly, a modest home, a little garden, and eventually, a shared dream, a family. But fate had other plans. After years of trying, doctor visits, endless tests, and silent nights filled with tears, we never had children. That emptiness created its own quiet sorrow. But we managed, or at least I told myself we did. The turning point came the year Ethan's younger brother, Jason, married a woman named Lillian. From the very first day, Lillian fascinated everyone. She was charismatic, polished, always dressed as if she belonged in magazines. Her laughter filled the room. Her compliments flowed easily, and she carried herself with such confidence that people seemed drawn to her. At first, I was too. I thought maybe I had gained a sister through marriage, someone to fill the absence I had always felt as an only child. But underneath that charm, there was a quiet sharpness I couldn't name. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me a second too long, her smile lingering in ways that felt less warm and more assessing. Ethan used to tell me I was imagining it, that I was too sensitive, but my instincts whispered otherwise. Still, I ignored them. Because isn't that what we do for family? Life rolled on, dinners together, family gatherings, holidays where we sat side by side. And when Jason and Lillian started struggling financially after his business hit a downturn, Ethan suggested we help them. That's when the joint account idea was born. Just a temporary thing, Ethan had assured me. So Jason and Lillian can keep afloat. We'll keep a portion of our savings there, easier for everyone to manage. I hesitated. Every fiber of my being wanted to say no. But how could I? These were family. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. At first, everything seemed fine. The account was used sparingly for groceries, the occasional emergency bill, nothing that set off alarms. Months turned into a year, and I grew comfortable enough to stop checking it obsessively. Life was busy, and Ethan kept assuring me, "It's all good. Marissa, don't worry so much." So I didn't. Then, one crisp autumn morning, everything collapsed. I had gone to pay for a small renovation project, a new fence around the garden I cherished, when the teller looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, there aren't enough funds in your account." My world tilted. I laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. I had worked my entire adult life to save nearly $85,000. It couldn't just vanish. But when I logged into the account later, my hands trembling over the keyboard, the truth punched me harder than any physical blow could. The balance showed less than $200. Every transaction was there, clear as daylight. Withdrawals, transfers, little by little, over months, and the name attached to them, Lillian. I remember sinking to the floor, the glow of the laptop screen searing into my eyes as tears blurred the numbers. My chest felt heavy, my breaths shallow. Betrayal doesn't arrive with fireworks. It crawls in quietly, like a shadow you never noticed until it devours the light. I confronted Ethan first. My voice cracked as I showed him the records, the undeniable proof. His face drained of color, disbelief flickering into anger. But his anger wasn't directed at me. It was at his brother and his wife. Still, underneath it, I could sense his guilt. He had pushed for this. He had told me not to worry. He had left the door wide open for a snake to slither in. When we called Jason and Lillian to the house, I thought maybe there'd be an explanation, some terrible misunderstanding. But the moment Lillian walked in, with her polished hair and her silk scarf, I knew. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look guilty. She looked prepared. Her words were venom coated in honey. Marissa, you don't understand. We needed the money. Jason's business, I cut her off. It wasn't your money to take. My voice shook, but the fire in my chest burned hotter than my fear. Jason shifted uncomfortably, but Lillian didn't flinch. Your family. Families share. You wouldn't want us on the street, would you? Something inside me snapped. The gall, the arrogance, the utter lack of remorse. It was unbearable. Years of scrimping, of sleepless nights working double shifts, of denying myself luxuries so I could feel the safety of a savings account. All gone. And she stood there as if she had every right. Ethan's anger exploded then. He shouted at Jason, demanded explanations, but Jason just sat with his head down, ashamed but complicit. Lillian, however, defended every action. To her, it wasn't theft, it was entitlement. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every laugh we had shared, every time I had let her into my home, every secret I had confided, and it all turned sour. The betrayal festered, but worse was the silence that followed, because Ethan begged me not to take it further. Their family, Marissa. Let's work it out quietly. We'll rebuild. Please, don't drag this through the courts. But how could I? How do you rebuild when the foundation has been shattered? My trust, my dignity, my sacrifices all stripped away. It wasn't just money. It was years of my life. And suddenly, I felt myself drowning in questions I never thought I'd ask. Who am I without that security? Who am I when even family can rob me blind? The days that followed blurred into a haze of anger and numbness. I'd catch myself staring out the window, hands clenched, imagining scenarios, confrontations, courtroom battles, cutting ties forever. But then I'd hear Ethan's voice, weary and pleading. Don't destroy the family, Marissa, please. And so I swallowed the rage, each gulp bitterer than the last. But rage doesn't stay buried. It simmers, boils, until it finds a way to erupt. And as I looked at Lillian still flaunting her expensive handbags, her polished nails, her smug smiles, I realized she wasn't just a thief. She was daring me to fight back, betting that I wouldn't. She was wrong. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me in the bathroom mirror the next morning. My eyes were swollen, my face pale, my lips pressed into a tight, unforgiving line. For years I had seen myself as the quiet one, the peacemaker, the woman who bent over backward to keep things calm, to keep people happy. But as I stared into that reflection, something hardened inside me. Lillian had taken my money, but I wasn't about to let her take the rest of me, my dignity, my voice, my will to fight. The hardest part was Ethan. He kept pleading for peace, and I understood why. He was caught between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his brother. But what about loyalty to me, to us? I felt invisible, my pain overshadowed by his fear of confrontation. And that cut deeper than he knew. I started retracing every detail of the theft. Late at night, while Ethan slept beside me, I pored over bank statements, highlighted transactions, made notes. The more I dug, the more I saw how calculated it had been. Lillian hadn't just dipped her hand in once or twice. She had carefully, methodically siphoned money over months, in amounts small enough not to trigger suspicion, but large enough to bleed me dry. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. And that realization broke something in me. I could have forgiven desperation. I could have forgiven a single mistake, a moment of weakness. But premeditation, that was cruelty. That was betrayal at its deepest level. I remember one afternoon vividly. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the stack of statements spread across the coffee table, when Lillian's laughter echoed in my head. I could see her at family gatherings, telling stories, throwing her head back with that loud, confident laugh. Everyone charmed by her presence, and I thought to myself, how many times had she laughed like that, knowing she was robbing me blind? That image sent a wave of rage so strong, I crushed the paper in my hands until my knuckles turned white. The tension at family gatherings grew unbearable. I avoided Jason and Lillian as much as I could, but sometimes I had no choice. Thanksgiving that year was the breaking point. I had cooked the turkey, prepared the stuffing, poured myself into hosting despite the storm raging inside me. I had promised Ethan I'd keep things civil. But then Lillian, wearing a designer dress I knew she could only afford with my stolen savings, had the audacity to lean across the table and say with a smirk, "You know, Marissa, you really should learn to loosen up. Life's too short to hold grudges." My fork froze midair. I stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. Everyone else laughed, thinking it was a harmless comment, but I saw the glint in her eyes. She knew. She was taunting me. I excused myself, walked into the kitchen, and gripped the edge of the counter so hard I thought my fingers might snap. My chest heaved, my throat burned, and all I wanted to do was scream. Ethan came in, concern etched on his face. "Please, Marissa, not tonight," he whispered. "Don't give her the satisfaction." But it wasn't about satisfaction anymore. It was about survival. That night, when everyone left, I sat Ethan down and told him the truth he didn't want to hear. "If you expect me to stay silent, then you don't know me at all. She didn't just steal our money, Ethan. She stole my trust, my security, my peace of mind. And if you can't stand beside me to get it back, then maybe I've lost more than money here." maybe I've lost my husband too. His silence was the answer I feared. In the weeks that followed, I began to plan. I wasn't reckless. I was methodical, just as she had been. I started gathering evidence not just of the theft, but of the life she had built with what she took from me. I spoke quietly with people Jason owed money to, with neighbors who had seen her shopping sprees, with acquaintances who whispered about the new car she drove. Piece by piece, I built a picture of a woman who thought she was untouchable, and all the while, I played my role. I smiled at gatherings, kept my voice steady, nodded when Ethan tried to soothe me. But inside, I was sharpening my resolve like a blade. The day the first crack appeared in her facade was almost poetic. I had gone to the bank again, not to look at my balance, there was nothing left to look at, but to request old records. The teller, a kind woman who had known me for years, lowered her voice and said, "I probably shouldn't say this, but be careful. People talk. And from what I've seen, she's not just dipping into your account. She's dipping into others too." My stomach dropped. Others. That revelation turned everything on its head. This wasn't just personal. It was a pattern, a sickness, a hunger for more than she ever earned. And suddenly, I realized maybe karma didn't need me to deliver revenge. Maybe she was already digging her own grave, one stolen dollar at a time. But still, I couldn't let it go. Not yet. I began to document everything. Dates, receipts, even photos when I could discreetly take them. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together the crime scene no one else wanted to acknowledge. And slowly, a plan began to form, not just to expose her, but to make sure she could never hurt anyone else the way she had hurt me. I remember one evening, sitting in my dimly lit living room, stacks of papers around me like walls closing in. I whispered to myself, "You thought I wouldn't fight back, Lillian, but you underestimated me." The words gave me strength, like an oath spoken into the silence. Still, the hardest part wasn't the evidence or the planning. It was carrying the weight of silence in my marriage. Ethan and I were growing farther apart with each passing day. His pleas for peace sounded more like excuses. His hesitation more like betrayal. Sometimes I wondered if I hated Lillian more for what she had stolen, or Ethan more for what he refused to defend. But deep down, I knew this was my battle, and whether Ethan stood with me or not, I would see it through. Because some betrayals demand justice. The night I decided to confront Lillian publicly was the first night in months that I actually slept soundly. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the calm that comes when you finally stop running from a storm and start preparing to walk straight into it. I knew there would be no turning back. No way to tuck the truth neatly away once it spilled out. But that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted everyone to see her for who she really was. I waited until Christmas. It was tradition for our families to gather at Jason and Lillian's home, which always looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine. That year, the decorations sparkled brighter than ever, every detail curated to perfection. The tree glittered with ornaments that, in my eyes, may as well have been paid for with the years of my labor. As I walked into their home, the smell of cinnamon and pine hit me, but beneath it was the acrid taste of resentment coating my tongue. The house was full siblings, cousins, neighbors, the perfect stage. I watched Lillian glide from guest to guest, her laughter ringing out like silver bells, her hand brushing Jason's arm as if she were the picture of devoted wifehood. Nobody saw the serpent beneath the smile. Nobody but me. Dinner was served, and as we all sat down, I felt the weight of the envelope in my bag. Inside were copies of the bank statements, highlighted transactions, records I had painstakingly collected. My hands trembled beneath the table as I waited. Ethan shot me a look across the table, his eyes pleading. But I looked away. This was happening. Halfway through dessert, I stood up. My chair scraped the floor, and the sound cut through the room like a blade. Conversations paused. Lillian looked up at me with a polite smile, tilting her head like she was curious what I was about to say. I have something I need to share, I began, my voice trembling at first but growing steadier as I continued. For months now, I've been carrying a truth that's eaten me alive. And since family is supposed to mean honesty, I think it's time everyone hears it. The room shifted with unease. Jason frowned. Ethan lowered his head, and Lillian's smile flickered just for a second before she composed herself again. I pulled the papers from my bag and laid them on the table. These are records from the joint account Ethan and I opened, the account where we put our savings. Every transaction is here, every withdrawal, and every single one made by Lillian. Gasps filled the room. Jason's face turned red, confusion and shame washing over him. But Lillian, she didn't crumble, didn't panic. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and smirked. You're really going to embarrass yourself like this? Marissa. In front of everyone, we both know you're exaggerating. I slammed my hand on the table, the papers rattling. Exaggerating. You drained nearly $85,000 of my life's work. Every hour I sacrificed. Every plan for the future gone. And you have the audacity to sit here and smirk. My voice cracked. But the fire inside me didn't falter. The room erupted into whispers, accusations flying back and forth. Jason sputtered. Lillian, tell me this isn't true. Please tell me she's lying. But Lillian didn't deny it. She shrugged, her tone dripping with arrogance. So what if I did? We needed it. Isn't that what family's for? That was it. The final straw. I turned to the room, to every stunned face staring at her. This isn't family. This is theft. This is betrayal. And if anyone here thinks otherwise, then maybe I've been living in the wrong family all along. The silence that followed was deafening. Jason stood, his voice breaking as he demanded answers from his wife. Ethan finally spoke, his words trembling with anger, but his anger was too late to stop the damage done, too late to repair the fracture in us. I didn't stay for the shouting match that followed. I walked out into the cold night, the snow crunching beneath my feet, tears streaming hot against my cheeks. But for the first time in months, the tears weren't from helplessness. They were from release. The fallout was immediate. Word spread quickly, neighbors whispered, relatives distanced themselves. Jason tried to repair the damage, but Lillian refused to apologize. Instead, she doubled down, painting me as vindictive, bitter, jealous. But the evidence was undeniable, and soon, cracks began to appear in the perfect image she had crafted for herself. Friends stopped inviting her. Family members stopped trusting her. And Jason? He looked like a man who had just woken from a dream to find himself living in a nightmare. Ethan and I barely spoke for weeks. The air between us was thick with tension, with the weight of everything left unsaid. He accused me of humiliating his brother, of tearing the family apart. I accused him of betraying me with his silence, of letting me fight alone. One night, as we sat across from each other in the dim light of our kitchen, I asked him the question that had been clawing at my chest. Tell me, Ethan, if it had been the other way around, if I had stolen from Jason and Lillian, would you have begged them to stay silent, or would you have stood by them instead of me? He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. The weeks turned into months, and I poured myself into rebuilding not the money, because money could be earned again, but myself. I started a side business I had always dreamed of, sewing custom dresses from my home. It was small, but it was mine. Each stitch felt like reclaiming a piece of what I had lost. Each customer's smile reminded me that value wasn't measured only in dollars, but in the integrity of what you create. Meanwhile, Lillian's world began to collapse. Her arrogance caught up with her. Other people came forward, neighbors, distant cousins, even friends claiming she had borrowed money, made promises, never repaid. The whispers turned into a chorus, and slowly, the facade she had built crumbled. Jason eventually filed for divorce. I heard he moved into a small apartment across town, while she clung to whatever scraps of luxury she could. Sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks about me. About the night I stood in her dining room and ripped the mask from her face. Does she regret it? Or does she still believe she was entitled? The truth is, I may never know. And maybe I don't need to, because the real battle was never just against her. It was against the part of myself that wanted to stay silent, to keep the peace, to swallow the pain, and that part of me lost. I found my voice. Still, the scar remains. My marriage is not what it once was. Ethan and I live together, but the trust between us is fractured. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with a mixture of guilt and resentment, as if he can't decide whether to blame me or thank me. And sometimes I wonder if our story will survive, or if, like Lillian's facade, it too will eventually collapse. But here's what I know betrayal teaches you to see clearly, to recognize who stands beside you, who hides behind you, and who sharpens their knife while smiling at your face. And though it broke me for a while, it also built me into someone stronger than I ever thought I could be. There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than words, when the weight of what remains unspoken presses on your chest until you can barely breathe. That was what my marriage turned into after Lillian's betrayal came to light. Ethan and I coexisted, shared meals, even made small talk about bills or groceries. But there was a vast emptiness between us. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than shouting ever could. I wanted to forgive him. I truly did. I wanted to believe that his hesitation, his begging for peace, was born of fear rather than disloyalty. But each time I replayed those nights the way he told me to let it go, the way he looked away when I needed him to look at me, I felt a sharpness pierce deeper into my chest. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even only about Lillian. It was about the man I had chosen to build a life with, and how quickly he had chosen comfort over truth. But I couldn't let that destroy me. Not after everything I had endured. So I poured myself into rebuilding. I worked harder on my sewing business, pushing through exhaustion, teaching myself marketing, learning how to reach customers online. And slowly, orders came in. Dresses, wedding gowns, even small alterations. My dining room turned into a studio, the hum of my sewing machine filling the silence where laughter and conversation used to live. It was empowering in its own way. For the first time in years, I was building something that belonged only to me, something no one could steal. Yet, even as I stitched new beginnings, the wounds of betrayal throbbed beneath the surface. Months later, karma finally came for Lillian. I heard it from a neighbor first, whispered in that half-gossipy, half-pitying tone people use when someone's downfall becomes public knowledge. Lillian had been caught forging Jason's signature on loan applications. It wasn't just my money she had stolen. She had been weaving a web of lies and debts that finally ensnared her. I can still remember the day I saw her mugshot on the local news. Her perfect hair pulled back harshly, her eyes hollow, stripped of the gloss and arrogance she once flaunted. My chest tightened not with pity, but with a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I didn't rejoice in her ruin, but I couldn't deny the grim sense of justice that coursed through me. Jason, devastated and humiliated, came to Ethan's one evening. I heard them talking quietly in the living room. His voice cracked with grief as he admitted, "She took everything from me. Not just money, my pride, my trust, my future." And for the first time, I felt a sliver of kinship with him. We were both victims of the same storm, wrecked by the same woman's greed. But Ethan, he still clung to the notion of family, to the belief that blood ties should somehow override betrayal. It was a rope he wouldn't let go of, even as it burned his hands. That was when I realized that perhaps the greatest difference between us was that I could accept the truth, no matter how ugly it was, while he insisted on dressing it up in illusions. The years that followed changed me more than I ever expected. My business grew. I moved my workshop into a rented studio downtown, hired a young assistant who reminded me of my younger self, bright-eyed, determined, eager to make something of her life. For the first time in so long, I felt pride that wasn't shadowed by loss. But home remained fractured. Ethan and I grew more distant. We weren't enemies, but we weren't partners anymore either. We lived like two people tied together by habit and history, not by love. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I wondered if Lillian's theft had stolen not just our money, but the very foundation of our marriage. And yet, despite it all, I never regretted speaking out. Because in speaking out, I reclaimed myself. I refused to let silence protect the guilty. I refused to let fear dictate my worth. One spring afternoon, as I walked through the park, I saw a group of young women sitting on a blanket, laughing, sharing secrets. I watched them for a moment, remembering how I once believed that trust was something automatic, something you gave without thought. Life had taught me differently. Trust wasn't free. Trust was earned, brick by brick, through honesty and loyalty. And when it was broken, it could take years or an entire lifetime to rebuild. It was then that I realized my story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about resilience, about the strength we discover when the people we counted on most let us down. About learning that survival sometimes means standing alone, even when your heart longs for someone to stand beside you. Ethan and I remain together, though not in the way people imagine marriage to be. We share a roof, but not the same dreams. We share meals, but not the same laughter. And sometimes, I wonder if someday I'll finally gather the courage to leave. But for now, I stay not because I need him, but because I've made peace with who I am, with what I've endured, with the fact that my life is mine to shape. As for Lillian, last I heard, she moved out of state after her release. Some say she's trying to start over. Some say she hasn't changed at all. I don't waste my energy wondering, because her story is hers, and mine is mine. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: betrayal may break you, but it doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do after. Do you let it hollow you out? Or do you let it carve space for strength, for growth, for new beginnings? I chose the latter. And though the scars will always remain, they remind me not of what I lost, but of what I survived. To those of you listening, if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt the sting of someone you trusted tearing your world apart, know this: you are stronger than you think. Speak your truth. Stand your ground. Rebuild, even if it's brick by brick, because no one can take away the resilience you forge in the fire of betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of your own battles, please share it with others. Leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to hear your stories too. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together.